This is Coffee Talk. I'm Kevin Belz.
Hi everyone, I'm Kim Perlak. I'm the chair of the guitar department at Berklee College of Music, and welcome to another Coffee Talk. We are joined as usual by our assistant chair, Sheryl Bailey. Hey Sheryl,
Hey there, coffee cheers.
it's afternoon here, and we're still drinking coffee.
Oh
We're
yeah.
brewing, we're just brewing throughout the day. It's that time of the year. And we're joined by our senior coordinator, Ben Cody. Hey Ben.
Hello.
Hey, Ben.
And our special guest this afternoon is Professor Kevin Belz of the guitar department. Hey Kevin.
Hey, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for being with us this afternoon.
My pleasure.
It's great to see you. It's great to see you in your studio. And
Yes.
we usually have a different question that we start off with, but we're gonna break protocol because for those of you who are watching it, there's some really cool equipment behind Kevin in the studio. And if you're listening, tell us about it. Because when we started, we were kind of talking about the gear. What do you got back there?
Well, as guitar player, all guitar players are kind of gearheads, right? I think it's kind of fading with me now. I'm done with this stage of my life, and now they're kind of sit because, and a lot of times I can't even use this stuff anymore because music has changed, clubs have changed, PA systems have changed. But back in the day, I do have quite a collection. I got some old, I don't know if you can see them up here, old amps and lots of guitars.
Oh, that's beautiful. It's really cool. It's like you built a little loft.
No, we didn't. And the thing is, when we bought the house in 2005, we I got married in 2005. We had a baby in 2005. We bought the house. Everything in my life completely 360, completely changed. I went from this crazy touring musician kid to responsible, have a house, child. It is everything changed. Everything changed. But yeah, the guitars and amps, I would, I didn't start out being a collector, but I was in a lot of different bands and a lot of touring bands. And the kind of music I was playing at the time, we all have our idols and our heroes that we look up to. And I always wanted that, oh, this would be really cool, the sound for this kind of music. I was doing a lot of vintage rock and roll with Barence Whitfield and the Savages, they were called. And we were touring Europe. I was doing a lot of, sorry, I got a bunch of pets in here that are not feeling too good right now. But anyway, I always wanted a certain sound. And this was vintage gear before it was crazy prices what it is now. It was kind of affordable, believe it or not. So I just bought what I liked, at the time, and whoever I was listening to. And I always went through phases. I listened to some swing guys or any kind of music that was happening that had to pertaining to the kind of music I was playing. So in vintage rock and roll, it could be Little Richard, it was Little Richard. And then I would get into some of the guitar players who were, swing country players, So I wanted that sound and I would hunt for that, oh, he's using that amp at that time. So yeah, that's what I ended up with. A lot of these old amps and guitars to match. And it went on and on. Did a lot of touring, and every time I'd switch gears, I played with Tony Lynn Washington. I don't know if you know her. She's a swingy blues, great, great blues singer. I actually did a performance center show with her for the Guitar Week one year. And that was more swingy, so that, again, I had a sound in mind, and
Mhm.
the vintage thing started with, I bought this amp. It was an old Vibrolux 1966, and I plugged into it. And it's not that it sounds the best, but it was just so durable and it was so versatile. And it was cheaper than the newer amps at the time. I think the first one I got was $500, and that I still have that amp. That amp is what, 3 or 4 thousand now, But it was just so versatile and it was easy to carry, and I just like that stuff, it was kind of a no-brainer. I'm like, oh, I can buy gear, and if I go sell it, I'm doubling my money if I ever did sell it. But so whatever kind of music I was playing at the time, I'd hunt down kind of the guitar, the amp, you know, and that
Yeah.
certain sound, you know?
You know, it's funny because right off the bat, there's a bunch of things that we could talk about sound and life
Yeah.
and phases of things. But one thing I find really interesting is um, you are known for being a very versatile guitar player.
Oh
And
boy, that's
yeah,
nice.
and I mean, and it's great to hear you talk about, okay, I'm hunting down the sound for this. I'm hunting down the sound for that. Like, you know, you play blues, you play R&B, you play rock, you play country, you play different I mean, in those styles, there's just this myriad of variety, right? There's all these things and then that you're known to be able to do. I'm wondering, like, within that quest to get the right sound for all these different projects that you do in the many styles you play, have you found like what kind of contributed to your sound? Like, is there a specific sound that when you play, you're like, yeah, that's really me, and it's a mixture of these different things?
You know, I was just talking with a student about that, and I'm one of those people who I can't stand to hear myself. I can't stand to hear the word. I'll do a recording, I'll do a record, and I just did a tribute to a friend of mine who just recently passed away, Amity Castanel, who
Mm.
played with Dr. John and Elvis Costello and Ellen Toussaint. And I did a record with him, his last record, and we were revisiting the tunes for this tribute. I'm listening to it. I'm listening to myself. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then I thought to myself, I hate to hear myself. It's just like, because, oh, I should have done that. I'm always thinking that way. But then again, I think, oh, I remember what I was kind of into at the time. And I'm thinking, well, you know what? I actually do sound like myself, no matter, like, I don't really, I'm not, that was like, more of a growing thing where I'm influenced by other musicians and players and you steal from them, but now I don't do that as much, and you do develop, whether you like it or not, your own sound. And I'm thinking to myself, I guess I kind of like how I play, but you can't really escape it, I think. And I always wonder too, like, I wonder if I'll ever have my own sound. And I think I literally just recently realized I do, you know?
That's cool.
And
That's cool.
I always thought like, and I listened to my friends. I'm like, oh man, they have their own sound. And a lot of my peers, they're like, they have their thing. They always have. How come when am I going to find my thing? But I literally just driving to my gig Sunday night, I'm listening to that record going, wow, maybe I do have my something that, because I
Yeah.
love, and even like, it's funny because I just got the latest issue. I subscribe to Vintage Guitar Magazine, and George Benson is actually one of my idols, like all around favorite guitar players of all time. And probably I think about it probably because he is a combination of everything I love. He's roots, he's blues, he's gospel, he's jazz, he's country, he's everything, you know? And
Yeah.
so there's that influence in there too. But I think it's just the bluesy thing and I love blues. I love the history and where music started, and it's got that common thread in all music. So
Mm.
that's why I think, like, to me, I always tell my students too, I think music, I don't, when you look at standards, like my mother, she used to bring me to hear the great guitar players, Barney Kessel and Oscar Peterson and Joe Pass. She'd bring me to all those concerts, and I'd watch these movies Out of Nowhere or Days of Wine and Roses. And I always tell my students, I'll put a standard in front of them, and I'll say, well, let's just check out this because it's got the chords and the proficiency. It's like, oh, I don't really like jazz. I'm like, well, it's not jazz. They're just old songs. And it so happens that they have a lot of chord changes, really nice chord changes. Today, there's not a lot of chord changes. It's very formulated in especially pop music or whatever. So I just look at music that way too. It's just, music is music. It's all the same. It's maybe played physically differently, because what you
Yeah.
country is similar to how you approach a jazz tune. It's just a different sound and a different physical approach.
Now that you listen to your sound and you think, okay, yeah, that is me, and I am warming up to myself, do you hear certain things that you did kind of grab from blues or country or jazz, like in what you think of as your own kind of dialect?
Yeah, I do. I definitely hear the blues. Some nice compliments I've had, and I didn't really understand it, but again, when I hear myself, it's funny because when you're playing, you hear yourself differently than when you're listening to yourself, on a recording or something. But some nice compliments I've had, it's like, oh, I like your jazz playing. I like when you throw jazz in a blues tune or a funk tune
Mhm.
because it's not too much, it's not too little, you
Yeah,
know? And
yeah.
so I kind of like that approach too, and I like players like that. Um, where I've always been like, I like to listen to music that I can hear, I can tell if somebody's even soloing, improvising, I can tell what song they're playing. Like I don't like to
Mm.
get too far away from the song. That's me personally. I kind of like sticking to a little bit of the melody, but then I also like that little tension kind of thing with that you can do in harmonies
Mm.
and in phrasing. So yeah, I do hear that, and that's probably a lot of the jazz players I listen to would like, especially George Benson. I'm still trying to figure out some of his crazy stuff that he does. Like I still go back to him. It's always him. Um, and then of course, then I go back to like Cornell Dupree and all the blues players. And it's funny because even when I get into players like Robin Ford when I was younger, I would listen to Robin Ford, but then I'd listen to who he did, and it would be like Mike Bloomfield. Like, well, if I don't,
Right.
I like to sound like Robin Ford, but how did he get to sound like that? So I'd go back to listen to who he did. And so yes, I hear some of that influence as well as not, more of a like Mike Bloomfield and Clapton and the British guys, and then you get into the country guys. It just goes on and on. But yeah, I do hear that. I do. I wish I could do it better. That's how I think. That's what I hear. I'm like, oh, I can hear. I could pull that whole thing off, but I got a piece of it.
I think it's a really interesting conversation because you play your own music as a leader, and then you're also a very prolific side person. And so you just mentioned Robin Ford, and a recent project you had was recording with Robin Ford. And so how does that work out for you? You have your own sound. You also are playing in that case with a person who is one of your influences. So how do you think about your sound in that case when you're in a support role to someone who also influenced you? Like, how does that play out sonically for you?
So 20 years ago, I would have been a nervous wreck. And I'd be like, oh man, I don't know about this. There's no way. I was so insecure, and I still am, and I always will be, but I kind of, you learn to live with that. But with my great friend Dave Lamino, we kind of grew up together. He asked me to do it, and the funny thing about that, it was after Guitar Week, and it was after 5 week, and after a long summer, and I'm like, oh, Dave, it's the last week of summer. I just kind of wanted that week off. I turned it down. I'm like, oh man, it's like the only week I have off. Can we do it any other time? He's like, oh, well, come on, it's just gonna be fun. I'm like, oh, because I'm at the point where I did so much traveling early on that I just don't like it anymore. So I was thinking more in terms of that, and then I'm thinking, okay, I'll do this, and so it turned out to be a great thing. It was really fun, and the connection with Robin, it was literally from the time he walked in the door. He came in a couple hours after I don't know if we did some tracking before he got there, or we were setting up, and he walked in, and it was literally from the minute he got there, like an old friend that I've known.
That's
He,
awesome.
yeah, there's no uncomfortable, or I wasn't the least bit nervous. And he looks at me, but the funny thing about it is he looks down at my guitar, and I have a Telecaster, and the reason I bring a Tele is because I'm flying, and I would have preferred a 335 or something a little more versatile as far as what we were doing. But I'm like, I don't know if I have to check this thing, and if it's a Gibson and if something happens, I'm like, oh, a Telecaster can fall out of the airplane, it's going to be fine. So I'm going to bring my workhorse guitar. So I brought that, and Robin walks in. Literally, the first thing he said, he goes, I heard we were doing more of like a stuff thing, which I'll tell you what that is in a minute, which is the early Cornell Dupree and Eric Gale and Richard T, that kind of vibe. He goes, oh, I thought this is kind of a stuff vibe, so I brought my Telly, and I'm thinking Robin's going to bring I think he has a Paul Reed Smith endorsement or something. I thought he was going to bring something like that. So we both have Tellys, thinking, oh my God, we're going to have the same sound. That's like, but he was funny. He just looks at it and he goes, well, choose your pickup, meaning, so we don't have the same thing going. And then he was asking me about the amps, and there's an amp maker a couple doors down who makes amps for Eric Clapton and David Gilmour and Mark Knopfler. And so we had David Gilmour's amp in the room. And I said, you know, I said, Robin, you can take David Gilmour's amp. And he goes, oh, who's he? He's like, and I'm like, he goes, was he in Queen? And the engineers, everybody's laughing. It was really funny. But anyway, it was so we started playing, and he goes, how does that amp, before we started playing, let me go back a little bit. He goes, how's that amp sounding? And it was just I like small little amps in the studio. They seem to record better. And I go, oh, it sounds great, you know, and I played something. He goes, what are you playing on this tune? And I just showed him and played a couple things I'm going to be doing for rhythm. He goes, great, okay, I'll just, you know, I'll do something different. And that's what the whole session was like, you know?
Mm,
We didn't even
yeah.
talk about, he even asked me, he's like, can you do this part? I'm not, you know what's kind of funny? And I idolize the guy, you know, I mean, he's just an amazing musician. But the thing is, I think early in the recording, I realized, oh my God, he's just like me. He's just like us, where you get in there and you're like, man, oh, I got to figure out this part. He's not this like, you know, this God who can, you know, everything he touches is perfect, you know. He's like, he had to go over some parts and he had to play a couple solos over. And you know, yeah, at one point it was funny. We were listening to playback, and I said, "Man, it's getting a little cluttered in there." And he goes, "Yeah, sorry, that's me. I'll change that." I'm like, "Oh my God, I just critiqued Robin Ford," you
Yeah.
know. But it turned out that the parts we worked really well together, and I think we listened to a lot of the same kind of music. We were talking a lot about, you know, that all the stuff that we listened to, and because like I said, I got really into who he got into, what, you know, and I was kind of turned on through reading about who he listened to. So I knew a lot about that stuff. And the parts came out really natural and easy, and I'm playing more something low rhythm stuff, and he's got this high chanky stuff on his telly. So the tones are different, the parts are different, and they work really, really nice together. And then since he's there, we had him do a bunch of solos. You know, might as well take advantage of it, right? Um, it was just really, it was a great experience. Amazing, you know.
Yeah.
At one point, I said to him too, he was playing a solo, and we did a couple takes of it. And I'm just thinking, oh man, that's kind of cool. It sounds that's great. Sounds like Robin Ford. And then he played a solo, like the third, maybe second or third take. And that's like, it just hit me. I'm listening while I'm playing. We did most of this stuff live. I'm thinking, man, that sounds like those records I listened to. And I even turned to him after the solo and I go, that sounds like Robin Ford. And he's like, oh, thanks, man. You know? So it's like, again, it's like, oh, he's just like us. You know, it takes him a couple times to warm up to stuff and parts and players and the vibe of everything. So it kind of put me at ease in a way, you know? But a great experience. It was really, he was a great guy, and it was amazing working with him.
That's a great story. I love that in every way. There's so many things to come back to in terms of sound and working in the studio, and also when you start to work with people that um, have now become your collaborator, but were someone that you listened to and learned from. I mean, there's a lot of things. I just want to say for the record, for people who are listening who follow Berklee, Dave Lamina is the chair of the piano department here and a longtime collaborator of Kevin's and many other great players. Robin Ford was our guest at Guitar Sessions. So a really great friend of the department, and you should check out all of his records as well. And so there's a lot of great names that you said in there. And David Gilmour that you're talking about is the David Gilmour who plays the guitar in Pink Floyd.
Floyd, yeah.
And we do have a David Gilmour here in the department who is also on an episode of Coffee Talk that you can find. So so there's a lot of great community references there. That's very cool. I want to touch on something you said before we get back to tone and practicing and all these things. And I love what you said about your life. That you said, you know, I made this big life change. Like I came off the road, I made a big life change. You had a family, you bought a house, you invested time into becoming a professor here. For those who don't know, like when you come and teach at a college, there's different ranks, and Kevin has attained the highest rank in academic teaching. So you're quite a teacher. You also teach in the 5-week program and the Guitar Sessions program, which are both summer programs that welcome aficionados of the instrument, and mostly college students who might be looking to transfer to Berklee or high school students who are looking to come to Berklee. So you've done a ton of teaching, and had a moment with Robin Ford where you realize, like, I think one of the things that we realize when this happens, when we're from this standpoint at Berklee, is that someone like Robin had this path where he stayed on that touring and recording track. And the reason we all know him and know him from the records and love these records and know him that way is because that's his professional path. And I think, as beautiful as that is, and as much as I honor and respect that completely, it's so tempting to fall into this trap where you start to think that other paths are not as good. Like there's a tier of paths. And sometimes people think of that from a financial standpoint. And it is true that there are certain things that you might do in music that might make you more money at different times or for different people, which is also not consistent. Of course, we know this. But I think what we're trying to do at Berklee, and I think what most musicians are trying to do, is to sort of relegate that back, that the path you choose is going to be the best one for your life. And that, I think, letting go of this mindset you might have as a younger person, it's more common in younger people, but I think throughout your life you could fall into the trap of thinking that what you might be doing isn't as strong just because it's different than the path that you first encountered. And even thinking of it as a path, I was saying that to a student. I was at another college teaching master classes, and he said, I'm not on a traditional path. And I'm like, well, maybe there's not a traditional path. Maybe that's just what your teacher did. Or maybe that's just what the first musician you thought was great did. It doesn't mean it's a path. It's just what they did. And so I think it'd be really fun for people to hear you talk about what you chose and how your relationship to your music maybe even grew or was enhanced because of what you chose, or how things changed for you when you made a big life decision as you did.
Yeah, a lot of things with that. So when I was younger, the touring thing, that was some of the best times of my life. I had such a great time. I could never in a million years do it now, though. It's real, and it's funny because when sometimes in classes, and the finals week, and the kids, we'll have some kids come in and like, man, I can't, I was up all night for the last 2 nights and I'm so tired. I'm like, well, that's kind of how it is when you're playing, If you're touring, that's how it's always like that. You're never well rested when you have a big, when you're playing a festival for 30,000 people. And 2 nights before that, you're traveling. Like when we were going through, driving through the mountains of Spain, and and of course we're younger and we're hanging out all night long and hardly sleeping. So you don't get. I don't ever remember playing a gig where everything's perfect. The temperature is perfect and you're well rested, and you're at your. It's just not like that. That being said, though, I remember Mighty Sam McLean I used to work with, this great soul singer, and we'd all be tired from traveling, and you can't even rest in the hotel when you get there because you got sound check and then whatever. But he would always say, he's like, well, the music will take over. The music takes over, and it's true. It doesn't matter how tired you are. It's as soon as you start playing, it's like everything goes away, and that's what keeps you going. That's what makes us do what we do. So I'll go ahead of a bunch of years, and the last real touring band I was playing with was Commander Cody. I don't know if you remember them. They had the big hit Hot Rod Lincoln, and I got to play with another idol of mine, Bill Kirchen, and that was a blast. That was great meeting and playing with him. So that was let me think, when that wasn't even that long ago, right before the pandemic. And I was probably playing with them quite a bit, 5 years or so. I was most of that tour, and see now I have issues like after a gig, I can't like just settle down. I come home and I'll watch TV, but I never really rest well because I get, you get the high energy and people, and even Sunday night was kind of like that. So even if you get home on time, I'm just not one of those people that I can fall asleep, but then I wake up 3 hours later. So I don't do well on the road. And that Commander Cody thing was kind of like that. And it turns out I was pretty sick a lot, maybe for a good year touring with them. And I found out much later, I had walking pneumonia, which turned into pneumonia, and I did end up in the hospital, you know? And that was from doing, you get in caught up in the cycle. And I guess musicians learn this, at least I did early on, like we just learn never to say no to a gig, you know? It's like, when is your last meal? So, you know, I would do that, and then I was working with Roger Brown's company. I don't know if they still own it. They might, or maybe his wife, but Bright Horizons. And we used to go to Florida, and we'd do a week there, and we'd do all these functions and things, you know, music situations. And so I did that, you know, I'd get off the road with Commander Cody, do that for a week. And then I remember coming home and then doing a gig down at the Cape, and it was freezing cold after Florida, 98 degrees. And I ended up with severe pneumonia in the hospital for like 2 days. And that's just, so not everybody's like that. That's just me. I just can't relax, and I'm not comfortable. I'm out of my element, and you're in different hotels. Some people do really well with that lifestyle. I can't anymore, you know? So I don't really look for it. But it was, again, it was the best time of my life, you know, playing and going and meeting different people, different countries, different everything. I'd rather stay locally and not even work that much, because it seems like I'm having more fun now doing less gigs, enjoying everything better. The teaching, I feel it's made me a better teacher, because I think back at those years, I'm like, oh my God, I must have been such a horrible teacher because I was so exhausted, you know? But on the other hand, I was trying to teach my students, this is what you need to do to do stuff like this, you know, or what you need to learn or play or whatever. But I was pretty tired when I was teaching, you know, and now I feel I'm more rested and I'm more aware. And I also have a daughter that's in college, and I can actually relate to, I was just talking to my class Monday about this. I'm like, I can totally relate to you guys now, you know, and what you're going through, and the stress of college and people and roommates, and I think I'm way more in tune, and I actually, not that I didn't like it. I always liked teaching and I always did it, but I think I enjoy it a lot more now. Um, and I'm comfortable, and I'm really conscious of my health now, like crazy conscious of it, where I wasn't before. You know, and that again, that's like I didn't really know something like that had to happen for me to realize what works and what doesn't. So that's, I think, and then all those experiences that I had with all those different bands and playing, and that's what I try to bring to the students, you know, like this is, you know, these are things that, you know, whether it's you know, talking about your sound or tone or what you're going to play on a certain part or what you're not going to play, you know, which is just as important. But yeah, I feel like I have a way more energy and more in tune with the students now, you know?
That's great. That's awesome. I get really grabbed my ear though when you said your daughter was in college, because now I know that we've known each other a long time. Because
Yeah.
I remember talking to you about horse camp
Oh,
and
that's
things like
right.
that, right? And
Right.
actually like making your teaching schedule to accommodate her activities and things like
Right.
that.
That
So
was, yeah.
yeah, so it's a lot of changes that
Get
you've
your
gone through as
priorities
a
change. Your
professional. Yeah.
priorities change, you know?
Yeah, that's so fascinating. So Sheryl, I'm gonna kick it to you because there are so many things I watched your face, um, from all the tone stuff to the road stuff to the teaching stuff, and also as a colleague who's influenced by many different styles. So I think take it wherever you want to go.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about, well, many things. Obviously, George Benson is,
Mm,
there's nothing much better than that. I
I
mean,
agree.
I think, yeah, I mean, some of his records are desert island picks for me.
Oh God. And my mother used to bring me to those concerts, and it's funny. I'm adopted actually, and I met my birth parents like maybe, well, now it's been 10, 13 years or something. But there's all musicians on both sides of that family, on the biological side. But my mother, adopted mother who raised me, was more of a music lover than everybody. And so she nurtured that whole music thing. But we used to go see, she loved George Benson as well. And we'd go hear him. And And I remember reading articles like, oh, the first part is really lame because it's all the commercial stuff, and then he'll play, or vice versa, or whatever it is. But even that breeze-in period, I'm like, even his pop stuff is amazing to me. It's like, oh my God, it's awesome. And I just read an article about, he was talking about how Quincy Jones didn't like his jazz playing and wanted Lee Ritenour to play some lead parts. I'm like, wow, how can you not like that? Even on the pop tunes, like I like everything he does. But yes, and again, he's like doing pop tunes and then he's going straight ahead jazz in the same concert. I'm like, I didn't
Well,
think of it
I
then,
mean,
but
he really enjoys being an entertainer and a singer, he enjoys it as much as playing guitar is what I get from that.
yeah,
And he doesn't compromise on any of those things though, like he's a great singer, he's a great entertainer, and he's a great guitarist. So he's kind of he's got it all worked out.
really does.
But thinking about, there was something that you said that I am always myself curious about, and I try to get my students curious about, is about um, going back to player sources. There's always that thing about, for instance, you hear Alan Holdsworth, like what's more modern in so many ways than Alan Holdsworth. When you find out he loved John Coltrane, and then he transcribed all Coltrane, but then that makes you go, well, what made Coltrane Coltrane? And then it goes back to Coleman Hawkins. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I always feel like it's like pulling a thread and you see how it connects to everything. And I also really love this. Actually, speaking of someone like Benson is a great person you could do. I've done this with Chick Corea is another one who I really love. Is if you go back and listen to their very first recordings and follow their evolution, when you listen to those very early George Benson records, and then when you get to Bad Benson, he's really developed that technique that I call it's like shred before there was shred.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But same thing when I listened to Chick Corea. I remember hearing I was driving and I was listening to some. I mean I love Horace Silver, and I'm sure you do too. And I was listening. I was like, wow, that sounds like a young Horace Silver, and it turned out to be Chick Corea.
Wow.
And Chick Corea played with Cal Jader, and then of course Chick loved Horace, and then you go by, oh, Horace came out of Bud Powell, and then you
Yep.
know what I mean. Like I just find that always interesting, and so I'm curious. Well, I have just your thoughts on how you bring that up with students. But the other thing you brought up was about melody, and
Mm.
obviously the way you play is blues based, and that's melody. Do you have any way that you approach with your students how to learn to be more melodic? How do you get to be more melodic?
Um, a couple things with that. First of all, I always have them, when we're working on phrasing, I always had like, and of course, George Benson does this, and I didn't even develop this because of him, but I feel like you have to sing what you play. If you can't, I always say, if you can't sing it, don't play it. Like, can you just sing what you played? And as guitar players, we just play. We can physically play and not shut up. We can just keep on playing. But you got to think. Like I always liked, especially when I got into jazz. When my first year at Berklee, really into jazz and Freddie Hubbard and I love Stanley Turrentine. And I transcribe a lot of Stanley Turrentine because it was like I could relate to what he was playing, especially that record Sugar. I don't know if you ever heard that record, but I just love every note on that record. It was like, and it was, and I could relate to it on guitar because I could hear the chord changes, and he would play bluesy guitar licks, but it was like he would play, and Freddie Hubbard too, and just the way they played, I could, so I think singing what you play. So if you close your eyes and you don't look at your guitar neck, that's a good exercise. Like, and put a metronome on, put it on 2 and 4. And even if you're playing over one chord change, and even if you're playing pentatonic 5 note, they're like, I don't know the notes well enough. Just play a pentatonic scale, 5 notes. You can sing those 5 notes and just choose variations of that, but sing it. And then I feel like if you leave space, it's like you get these answers in your ear, If you sing a melody, if you leave space, you'll hear the answer. But if you don't leave space, you don't. you know. So that's how and it's I think I read an article about Larry Carlton talking about that, and he said it best. It's like a game. It's like a game you're playing when you're improvising. You're playing a game with yourself. You're asking a question. You're waiting for and then you play the response to it. And it can be a lot of avenues. Maybe it doesn't work out the way you thought, but that brings you down a different road. You know, it's like, oh wow, I'll try something like that. But you're breathing, and if you think about all the, you know, horn players, they have to physically play and breathe, and so they have to rest. You know, so if you think in terms of how a horn player would play, that's how I kind of approach it. You know, I think in terms, even with blues guitar, like just straight ahead B.B. King. You know, everything, you know, I played in a lot, you know, I was in the back roads of Louisiana, Monroe, Louisiana. And man, the way a lot of these blues players, they grew up, there was no records, there's no radio, there's no guitar stores, Guitar Center. They would go to the local juke joint and sit outside and hear their favorite player, you know, when they were in town. So they could only imitate them with their voice. They didn't know scales or pentatonic scales or how to tune their guitar. That's why all the tunings are kind of weird. They're just like, tune it to a chord and it sounds close, you know, in open string. So they all have this non-conventional tunings and playing styles. But if you listen to the way they sing, they are playing their solos exactly the way they're phrasing their singing. You know, like Albert King, B.B., Freddie King, all those guys, you know. You know, even Sister Rosetta Thorpe, I got really into when I was in England. You know, the gospel stuff. It's the same. It goes on and on. All these great players are usually great singers. And if you listen to the way they phrase, and George Benson, comes back to George Benson always, you know, you listen to how they sing, and it's like they're playing the same thing on guitar, you know, or on their instrument, whatever instrument it is. So I definitely try to do that, you know, and I try to hear stuff, and sometimes I don't, you know. But I try to, I've never been a technical player. You know, that's me. That's just, I'm not a technical guy, and I can't sit down and practice speed or anything like that. That's just not how I hear music. But I do hear it as more melody, you know, it's got to be a melody in there somewhere, you know. And you listen to all those Steely Dan records back in the day, there's all, you know, the guitar solos are part of the song, you know. Reeling in the Years or something like that. They've become part of the song. So I've always tried to approach it that way, as like, you know, if you were singing the song, or you got to, you know, try to sing it.
Yeah. I mean, Ben, I'm looking at you because you play a style of guitar that has a lot of technical requirement. But I do feel like you're a melodist as well. And I watched your reactions as Kevin was talking about space. And I wonder if you hear something in what he's saying that you feel is stylistically universal.
Actually, yeah. I mean, Kevin said exactly what I was thinking. It's like when you play, you want to think of it as, all right, where's the breath going to be, you know? And it's funny too, because Kevin mentioning, you know, finding your influences. I mean, I think that's just such a powerful way to develop your style. Because I mean, for me, I mean, Eddie Van Halen was my guy. But I remember when I first was starting playing, you know, finding out Eddie Van Halen's favorite guitar player was Eric Clapton. I remember,
Yeah.
you know, so that got me into Clapton. I'm thinking this doesn't sound anything like Eddie Van Halen. But then I got really into Clapton and the blues, and you know, it was Clapton's influences, and you know, I think it's important to do that, because even with kind of the quote unquote, you know, shredders, you know, like even like Eddie Van Halen, people think of him as, you know, a shredder, but if you listen to a lot of his licks and his solos, there are breaths in them. I mean, that's true, I think, with almost every style. That's what makes a motif a motif. It's what makes a musical idea, I think, sound complete. Even if you're not a musician, I think it's just something, and as humans, you recognize, like, all right, that's a complete thought. And it's like you said, as a guitar player, you know, we don't have to physically take breaths. So it can be hard. Sometimes at the beginning it has to be, you know, a conscious decision in your playing. But I think as long as you kind of go through that, then over time you help develop a good sense of creating melodies and motifs in a complete way.
I agree. You know, it's funny because the whole Marshall thing up here is I got those back in the day because I wanted to sound like the early Eric Clapton records, the same records that Eddie listened to. That blew my mind when I heard that. I'm like, oh, that is the most incredible tone ever. So I got that year amp and I got, the Les Paul. And then of course you read about why did they do this? And I even know that the drummer that has worked with, he knows the engineer that was on that session. And I guess the problem in the studio was leakage in the microphones because Clapton insisted in 1966 to turn his amp up to 8. And the reason why is he wanted not only his live sound, but he wanted to sound like a saxophone. So the Marshalls, you read the old brochures for Marshalls of that year, it's like distortion free. There's, that's actually these Marshalls, believe it or not, because it's basically Jim Marshall copying what Leo Fender did. It's the exact same circuit, but with British parts. That is the best sounding jazz amp I've ever heard. There's hardly any treble on those things, and you turn them down low, it's like, oh, that is the most beautiful, clean sound I've ever heard. I don't have a Fender amp that sounds like that, but of course you turn it up and you get that, and Clapton's talking about he wanted a saxophone sound. So it's still really clean sounding, but it's got this beautiful sustain thing, and that's where that came from, But yes, that was a huge influence record for a lot of people, and you listen to Eddie Van Halen and it's the same thing we're talking about, whether it's jazz or whatever, Benson or any of these other players, but all those Van Halen records, his solos became part of the song. It's like, how can you hear that song without that solo, right?
Yeah, that's right. All right. Okay, Kevin, I'm going to ask you the first question that we were going to ask you. Now that you've talked about your touring life and your teaching life and all of the different parts of your life, do you drink coffee? And has your life lived on the road and in the classroom influenced your coffee routine?
Oh, yes. Yes. So I do drink coffee, not as much as I used to. Well, I try for
Okay.
one cup a day, except when I'm at Berklee. It's got to be 2. Sorry. It's 2 in the afternoon. It's after, just ask John. But yes, I have. So you get that low blood sugar around 2 o'clock. So if I have a full day left, I have to have another cup. An espresso would be nice.
So it is pretty strong here, though. I mean, John is our coordinator who's out there. There's a little coffee bar, little faculty coffee bar outside, which was the inspiration for this entire podcast. But yeah, it's still rocking out there at about 2 o'clock because it is when everyone has their dip. So that's really good. And the other question is about first days, and you kind of alluded to this, like when I came to Berklee. You've had a different first days at Berklee, and I'm wondering what your impressions were when you first came, and I also hope that you could touch on one other thing about that that I think a lot of students are thinking this. So we have quite a few requirements here for learning in the guitar department of harmony and scales and modes and chord forms and things that are based in the jazz language. And I think there are a number of students who come and say, well, I'm not going to be a jazz guitarist. Do I really need to learn those? And I think in your career and in your music, you've proven that you can find so much great opportunity and all these in the jazz language for the music you play. And so I'm wondering, like, if you could talk a little bit about, like, when you first came to Berklee, were those kinds of things on your radar? Are there things that you kind of grabbed from the curriculum that maybe wasn't in your main wheelhouse that has really influenced your playing?
When I came to Berklee, I was, again, at that time, I was going through a huge jazz phase, I had my guitar teacher back home he played in the band Spyro Gyra, and he was
Oh yeah, sure.
from Buffalo, New York, Rick Strauss. So I was really into jazz, and I was just Wes Montgomery, and I've just recently got back into Grant Green again. I'm kind of obsessed with Grant Green all over again, but that's another story. So when I did start, I wanted to learn the jazz vocabulary. I love Pat Metheny, and so I wanted to understand harmony. you know, and I was actually good at harmony. Harmony just makes sense to me. It seems to always made sense. I always did well with that. And it helped in many ways. And I see again, I don't look at that. I don't even look at jazz harmony or whatever they call it at Berklee now. I don't teach harmony, so I don't know how it's changed, but it's still the same. You know, I don't look at it as jazz harmony. I just look at it as harmony, you know? So, you know, I remember I used to do this kind of country, swingy roots kind of music with Anita Suhannon. And she would, you know, we do a lot of different, it was kind of like Nora Jones type stuff, you know? And so there's a lot of complicated chords in there, you know? But I remember, you know, if I hate reading on a gig, you know, especially a dark club. Like I'd rather just memorize. I'd sit with the music all week, and I'd rather memorize it. I feel like I can play a little bit better. But if you do read, I feel like with knowing harmony, no matter what style it is, you can look at a page, and I've done this with students, and you don't have to just read it down. You know who actually helps, now that I think of this, it's popped in my head. Bobby Hebb, right? Who wrote the song Sunny. I used to work with Thomas Hebb. And he used to say to me, he's like, man, he's like, let's do this tune. He named some standard. I'm like, Thomas, I don't know. I don't really know. And he's like, just play it, man. We'll just play it. And you'll know it after you play it the first time. And he was right. You know, it's like you're forced to kind of almost train wreck. Or if you're looking at the chart, you can start identifying these parts. Like I'll just look at a song like, oh, okay, that's in the key of G. And your ears do get used to hearing certain common chord progressions.
Right.
Oh, it's modulating. Oh, it's going to minor now. You've heard that before. So it's a familiar territory. So knowing harmony has helped me. And this with any style, whether it's a pop, rock tune, blues, country, gospel, whatever, you start to hear these changes and you know why they work and what to play over them and why they work, because it's you know, and sometimes it won't go where you think it's going to. You know who's like that is Burt Bacharach tunes. Have you ever listened to Burt Bacharach? Like they're all really
Yeah.
cool melodic tunes, but they never they don't go to places where you think. So analyzing tunes to me is always a good thing. If I've never played the song before, you look at it, at least you like, okay, can I see that? It's like, oh, that's an A. Oh, the bridge goes to B minor. Oh, and then there's a couple 2/5s that lead you back to the one. You know, that's the tune's memorized. That's it. You know, and then you go to play it, and then you hear where those parts happen. So in my head, it is definitely harmony. It's understanding harmony. It's huge because when you play with players, there's a lot of great players that aren't schooled in that kind of thing with knowing harmony and studied diatonic and non-diatonic stuff. And they really can't play outside of maybe a 1-4-5 or whatever they're doing. They really can't. They might be great at just that, but they're really kind of stuck, you know, and they have no clue what to play. So, you know, I used to do a gospel gig too. I did that for years and years, and they were completely unskooled musicians, but amazing musicians, you know, and they heard all this stuff and they heard the harmony. So whether you hear it, you know, you hear it in your head. George Benson, again, he has no idea how to communicate what he's doing, but he absolutely hears it. So it doesn't matter how you do it, but it's such an important part of the musical language. Or, you know, communicating with other band members. You know, if you haven't played with the rhythm section, hey, you know, we're doing this tune. It's going to be 1 flat 7, and then the bridge is going to be 3 6, and then 4 5. You got to know that instantly. You can't even think about that for half a second. You have to know exactly, and they're like, okay, cool, and then you play it. So that's harmony. You got to know harmony. It's not jazz. It's not jazz harmony. It's just understanding how music works, you know, and what directions it can take. So
I love that. I love like thinking it's just a language. It's just how you name something, and then we all know what we're talking about.
yeah,
And I think and getting curious about something like that when you don't know and looking for the patterns and then being able to hear them back to yourself. It's such a cool approach because it stops it from being so scary and makes it being more like, okay, let's get really curious about this and get in there. And then you start to see it everywhere, right?
yeah,
That's
yeah,
cool.
yeah. The wheel has
Ben, okay, Ben. So I got excited for a second because Ben, this is a good lead in to your question.
Yes. Yeah. I just I want to say quickly on the topic of first days at Berklee.
Yep.
My first day, I was 14 in 2011 doing the guitar sessions, and Kevin was my ensemble teacher for a guitar session.
I
Hey.
remember it like it was yesterday. I remember Ben walking in.
Yeah,
Yep. And I remember, I always go, I get a feel for the class now. I don't teach those classes like I used to. I just, here's the tune we're doing. Shut up, let's play. It's not like that. You get somebody like Ben, and I'm like, what do you guys like? What do you listen to? Ben's like, oh, I really like Eddie Van Halen. I remember like it was yesterday. And I'm like, well, do you know any Eddie Van Halen? He's like, yeah, I know Eruption. I'm like, oh, okay, can you play a little bit of it? And he nailed it. He played it. I'm like, you guys, we're doing Eruption for the concert. It's like,
I guess,
okay, what's that?
on the topic of students asking you things, the question we ask everyone is, out of everything that the students are asking their teachers, what do you think is something they should be asking that maybe they're not thinking of asking?
I don't think they know what to ask, and I don't think they know. What they're thinking, but they're afraid to ask, kind of thing, you mean?
Or something that they're just might not even be on their radar to ask that you think they should be.
I think the biggest problem, it's not even a problem because they don't realize it or nobody's told them, but the timing thing is always a big issue. Playing in time. It's so huge. And it's kind of a boring thing to do, but I don't think it is. But everybody's playing the latest cool licks of whatever guitar player, but they don't play it in time, and nobody can play in time, and that you gotta learn how to play in time, and you gotta learn how to play with a metronome. Some of them can, and I do that a lot too in the classroom. I'll put the click on like it's shaking the room, But once they get in the pocket and the groove, they enjoy it, and then you feel music. All of a sudden you feel it. You're not just playing it. You're not just physically playing. So I think students, I don't think they don't know, they don't understand that that's how important playing in time is. And it sounds like a simple thing, but that has to do with not only rhythm, but soloing and lines, whatever, and moving. Like your body should move with the music so you feel what you're playing. Because if they're having a hard time playing in time, I notice they're not tapping their foot, or they're tapping it fast, or they're not hearing it, So I think that's a big one though. You need to focus on everybody. I focus on that. I still do that. I'll put the metronome on random 2 and 4. I like 2 and 4 because it gives it a little swing, or 1, 2, 3, 4 for just like straight, whatever you're doing, chords or something. But it's a hard thing, but once you get it, it's actually kind of fun and locking in, and it teaches you how to listen too, and how to play with restraint. Because when you get nervous, I always say this too, it's easy to play fast. It's really easy to play fast. It's so hard to play slow. It's so hard to just restraint and play slow,
Yeah. This is great advice. I mean, what an amazing hour. We've touched on so many huge topics in such a cool way. Sheryl, as we're kind of wrapping up our coffee, our afternoon cup or lunchtime cup, what is there something left on your mind to ask Kevin as we do this?
No, I mean, I thought, Kevin, you shared so much great, so many great tips. I love what you're talking about with melody, just learning to sing, and also just going back and doing your homework, following that thread back to sources, because that makes you a complete player. And I think people do lose sight of that. They like whoever the newest, youngest thing or player is, and they came from somewhere. We all come from somewhere, and I think in order to go somewhere meaningful, the more we know about where we came from will lead you in that direction in a meaningful way. So thanks for bringing up all those topics, and of course playing in time, big important one.
Yeah, I think the scales and all that stuff, you have to learn them. I always say it's like learning how to ride a bike. Do you remember learning how to ride a bike? You really don't. But when at the time you had to think about all these things to do, I'm sure there's all these mechanical things, and then you do it a couple of times, and you really get on a bike and you never think about it. And I think all the scales and all that chords and all that stuff is just that's what it turns into. After you do your homework and you get that stuff down and you really think about it. And I always tell my students, like, practice the hard stuff first and practice it early in the morning when you're fresh. Like, just get it out of the way, you know? And then you can kind of jam at the end. That's how I always used to practice when I was a student at Berklee. I remember sight reading in the beginning and doing my scales and all that stuff, just get that out of the way. And then you did it, and memorize it and know it so you don't have to think about it. If you have to think about fingerings, how are you can't improvise because you don't know the fingering up here, So once you get that out of the way, you don't have to think about it. And it is like riding a bike,
Yeah. Ben, what about you? What's on your mind at the end here?
I mean, I think it's great, just the theme of how everything is so universal. We talked about it's harmony. It's not necessarily jazz harmony. It's harmony. Use it for all, playing in time. Again, doesn't matter what style you're in. It's about, like you just said, going back, doing your homework, and just developing skills regardless of what style you play.
Yeah. I mean, I want to say, Kevin, that I think this is so timely because people are going to listen to this conversation as a lot of our students are going home for a break, and you're going to see your family. And some people are going to be looking at their last semester of college, or other people are tuning into this as at different stages in their life. And I think what you've reminded everyone is your musical life can have all kinds of different stages, and you're still a great musician. You're still a virtuoso. You're still learning in all of those, right?
Always.
So there's
Never
this
stop.
opportunity to keep developing and to keep growing and to play at the absolute highest level. And sometimes your life is on the road, and sometimes it's in the recording studio, and sometimes it's in the classroom, and sometimes it's a different mix of all those things, so that you really can have a life that you want, that you love, that also will grow and change. And I think that's so important. It's a real gift for an episode that comes out near the holidays, for people to know. I think it's like it takes the pressure off, because I think when you're young, that's one of the questions you don't know to ask, because you feel like you've got to make all the decisions right now, and then that's going to be your path forever and you're stuck on it. But I think what you've shown us just by talking about your life and your music is that that's actually not the whole truth. The whole truth is that you do different things in different combinations throughout your life, and still at a very high level.
And it keeps it interesting, and it keeps you don't get burnt out, and it's always changing. There's always different avenues you're going down, and you meet different people, and leads you to different things. Just keep an open mind too, because don't pigeonhole just like I only like this kind of music. Try music that you don't like, because it makes you anything that makes you uncomfortable almost. At least you tried it. It's like, okay, I felt that's kind of cool. You play whatever is going to develop you, and make you a better musician. Anything out of your element is going to make you grow.
That's great. That's a great note to end on. And so we're going to keep hanging out. But before we do that, I want to say thank you, Ben Cody. Thank you, Sheryl Bailey. And thank you, Professor Kevin Belz.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. And we'll be together with you all on the next Coffee Talk.